You get to the checkout and the total pops up, $19.99. Without even thinking about it, your brain quietly rounds that number down. Not all the way to $19, but somehow $20 still feels just a little farther away. It's strange when you stop and think about it, because you know exactly how much you're paying. The price isn't hidden, the math isn't difficult, and yet stores all over America keep ending prices with 0.99. Walk through Walmart, scroll through Amazon, order a meal at McDonald's. Almost everywhere you look, prices stop just short of the next whole number. After seeing it thousands of times, it's easy to assume that's just how pricing works, but it isn't. Every one of those numbers was chosen on purpose, and the reason has surprisingly little to do with saving you a penny. Think about how you actually shop. You're comparing cereal brands, looking for paper towels, checking your grocery list. Your phone vibrates. Someone's asking if you remembered the milk. You're making dozens of tiny decisions in just a few minutes. No one stands in the middle of the aisle, calculating every price down to the last cent. Your mind simply moves too fast for that. So instead, it starts simplifying. Here's where things get interesting. Imagine two bottles of shampoo sitting next to each other. One costs $3.99. The other costs $4.99. Technically, they're only $1 apart, but they rarely feel that way. Crossing from $3 to $4 feels bigger than adding a single dollar should. It's almost like stepping into an entirely different price range. That's because the first number does more work than the last two. When your eyes land on $3.99, they don't start with the cents. They start with the 3. By the time you notice the 99 cents, your brain has already started filing that product into the $3 category. Psychologists call this the left digit effect. The name sounds complicated. The idea isn't. Changing the first digit often changes how expensive something feels, far more than changing the cents at the end. That's why $4.99 feels much closer to $4 than 5, even though it's only 1 penny away. Once you notice that pattern, you start seeing it everywhere. The gallon of gas advertised at $3.49. The streaming service for $9.99 a month. The headphones marked down to $49.99. Different products, different industries. The exact same strategy. But here's something most people never think about. The 0.99 doesn't just make one price look smaller. It also changes how far apart two prices feel. Imagine you're comparing two TVs. One is $499. The other is $599. They're $100 apart. But because your brain quickly separates them into the 400s and the 500s, the gap often feels even larger than it really is. Stores understand that. Pricing isn't only about making something seem cheaper. It's also about making competing products seem farther away. The funny part is that nobody's really being fooled. You already know $19.99 is basically $20. You've probably even joked about it before. So why does the strategy keep showing up? Because this isn't really about math. It's about first impressions. The first number your eyes land on quietly becomes the reference point for everything that follows. That happens before you've compared features, before you've read reviews, before you've decided whether you actually want the product. And that's incredibly valuable. Companies spend millions of dollars testing prices. If changing 1 penny didn't influence buying decisions, retailers would have stopped doing it decades ago. Instead, the strategy spread almost everywhere. Not because shoppers are careless, because shopping is fast. You're constantly filtering information, choosing between dozens of products, ignoring hundreds of others. The easier a price is to process, the easier it becomes to place that product into a mental category. Under $5, around $20, less than $100. Those categories matter more than most people realize. But here's where the story becomes even stranger. If everyone has seen 0.99 pricing, thousands of times. If everyone already knows it's basically the same as the next whole number, why hasn't the trick stopped working? After all, once you know how a magic trick works, it usually isn't magic anymore. So why does this one still influence millions of people every single day? The answer has less to do with pricing and much more to do with how your brain makes decisions before you even realize it's making them. The answer is surprisingly simple. Knowing about a shortcut isn't the same as stopping yourself from using it. Think about an optical illusion. You can stare at it for minutes. Someone can explain exactly how it works. You might even understand the science behind it. And yet, when you look back at the picture, you still see the illusion. Your eyes haven't changed, neither has your brain. Pricing works in a similar way. By the time you consciously tell yourself, that's basically $20, your brain has already made its first impression. That first impression happens automatically, and automatic decisions are incredibly difficult to turn off. You can see that every time you fill a shopping cart. Maybe you toss in a carton of eggs for $4.99, a bottle of juice for $3.99, paper towels for $9.99, a frozen pizza for $7.99. Without realizing it, you start estimating the total in your head. But something interesting happens at checkout. The final number almost always feels just a little higher than you expected. Not because you're bad at math, because your brain quietly rounded down dozens of prices while you were shopping. One item doesn't make much difference. Neither does two. But after 20 or 30 products, those tiny mental shortcuts begin adding up. And suddenly, the receipt feels more expensive than the shopping trip ever did. The same thing happens outside the grocery store. Look at subscription services. $9.99 a month, $7.99 a month, $14.99 a month. Individually, none of them sounds particularly expensive. But stack 5 or 6 subscriptions together and you're suddenly spending hundreds of dollars every year. Nothing about the price was hidden. The numbers were sitting there in plain sight the entire time. The only thing that changed was how they felt. Retailers have understood that feeling for a very long time. One of the earliest stories behind 99 pricing goes back to the late 19th century. Instead of charging exactly $1, some stores charged 99 cents, so cashiers had to open the register and make change. That created a record of the sale, making it much harder for employees to pocket cash without anyone noticing. Historians still debate whether that was the original reason, but over time, businesses discovered something far more valuable. Customers responded differently to those prices. And once companies realized that, 0.99 pricing stopped being about bookkeeping. It became part of marketing. But here's where the story takes another turn. If prices ending in 0.99 are so effective, why don't premium brands use them on everything? Walk into Starbucks. The menu isn't trying to convince you that your coffee is the cheapest in town. That's not the story Starbucks wants to tell. It wants to feel consistent, comfortable, a small daily ritual. Now think about luxury watches, designer handbags, or high-end restaurants. Round numbers show up much more often. Not because luxury companies don't understand psychology, because they understand a different kind of psychology. A price ending in 0.99 quietly whispers, "This is a deal." A clean, round number says something entirely different. This is exactly what it should cost. One message emphasizes savings. The other emphasizes confidence. Neither is objectively more truthful. They're simply telling different stories before you've even touched the product. And that's the real purpose of pricing. Not just to communicate cost, but to communicate positioning. A discount retailer wants you thinking about value. A luxury brand wants you thinking about quality. The price tag becomes part of the product long before the product is in your hands. Once you see that, you begin noticing the same pattern everywhere: packaging, advertising, store layouts, limited time offers. None of those things change what the product actually is. They change how you experience it. Price is simply one more tool for shaping that experience. Which means the missing penny was never the product, perception was. Stores were never hoping you couldn't do basic math. They knew you could. What they understood was something much more interesting. People rarely make buying decisions with a calculator. They make them with quick impressions, tiny comparisons, split-second judgments. Logic eventually joins the conversation, but first impressions usually get there first. That's why a product priced at $9.99 doesn't have to fool you forever. Only has to guide your attention for a fraction of a second. And in retail, that fraction of a second is often enough. So the next time you walk into Walmart, or order lunch at McDonald's, or glance at a price tag that ends in 0.99, you'll probably still recognize that it's basically the next whole dollar. Almost everyone does. But you'll also notice something you probably never noticed before. The number itself was never the strategy. The strategy was deciding which part of that number your brain would meet first. Because the most successful businesses don't just influence what people buy, they influence how people see what they're buying. And sometimes that starts with nothing more than a single missing penny.